Hello my friends, and welcome to episode 4 of my State of PlayStation Studios series. This time, I'm deep diving into Firesprite, who are one of the most mysterious developers under the PlayStation Studios umbrella. I'll explain why as we go through their decade-long history, and don't be surprised if you also get hyped for one of their many upcoming projects coming to the PS5. There's a reason why Sony has so much faith in them. So like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and let's get started. Firesprite is a British developer, formed by ex-workers of Studio Liverpool, which Sony closed in 2012. In fact, much of Firesprite's staff worked at Studio Liverpool, even back when it was called Psygnosis, including the 5 founders who've worked on games for every PlayStation console. And although they were founded only a year before the PS4 released, their first game was not only a PS4 launch title, but it was the pack-in game that came pre-installed, called The Playroom. However, The Playroom was primarily developed by Japan Studios' Asobi division to demonstrate the PS4's camera and DualShock 4 capabilities, with Firesprite just working on the visuals. We'll therefore discuss The Playroom properly during the Team Asobi deep dive, but for Firesprite, it must have been encouraging to see Sony willing to collaborate with them so soon into the developer's life, especially after the messy closure of Studio Liverpool. And this partnership would continue to grow with Firesprite's next project, 2014's Run Sackboy Run, for iOS devices. This was a free-to-play endless runner that had no real plot and was basically a way to advertise Little Big Planet 3, which released a month later. In fact, the game's biggest rewards were exclusive costumes for Little Big Planet 3. Although it did come to the PS Vita about 6 months later, neither version set the world on fire. Its critical reception was also only a 65 on Metacritic due to its repetitive gameplay. Still, it was good for Firesprite to ship their first game that was solely developed by them. And working on one of Sony's most popular IP only helped strengthen the relationship between the two in a low-stakes situation.
Firesprite was founded in 2012. So there were 5 of us when we started, the 5 directors as of now. We started as a nice little group of 10 people in our first office and quickly got to about 15 in our first year. We thought we'd build a game studio which was better than we had before, and we're trying to be something that we could grow and be proud of in the future.
Firesprite's next game was 2016's The Playroom VR. Like before, it came free with Sony's PSVR and contained 6 asymmetrical multiplayer minigames to demonstrate the headset's VR capabilities. Unlike The Playroom, which wasn't reviewed enough to receive a Metacritic, The Playroom VR got a 77 due to Robots Rescue feeling like the only fleshed out game you'd play more than once. Again though, Firesprite just helped with the visuals, so we'll discuss the game further in Team Asobi's episode. But I thought it was important to bring up, as this would be the game that set the tone for Firesprite's future, because all future games would be in VR, like 2017's Air Force Special Ops Nightfall, where you complete Halo jumps in VR all from a first-person perspective. Yes, this sounds cool, and it was free, but I was surprised to learn this game even existed, as despite being a day one purchaser of PSVR, I'd never heard of it. And I'm clearly not the only one, as there's 0 reviews for it on Metacritic, and Sony don't even bother to mention Firesprite on the store page. The gameplay actually looks decent to be fair though, and I'm sure the experience immensely helped with their next game, 2018's The Persistence, which would finally be Firesprite's first console game with any real budget behind it, that was solely developed by them and took them 3 years to develop. Set in 2057, aboard a stranded spaceship called The Persistence, the player assumes control of a clone and is tasked with fighting or stealthing past mutated clones to restart it. I do remember the game coming out and found the premise interesting, especially as it was built exclusively for PlayStation VR, but skipped it because I couldn't be bothered with the cumbersome setup anymore. It was definitely the right choice, as a 78 on Metacritic isn't worth dealing with all those wires. Fortunately, Firesprite released a modified non-VR version in 2020 that released on all consoles and PC, as well as the Persistent Enhanced for next-gen consoles in 2021, which is the version I played. And well, let's just say I'm not surprised by the 71 on Metacritic. Though despite the mediocre score, Sony acquired Firesprite only a few months later. and then in 2022, Sony purchased them a much larger office to properly accommodate the 250 plus employees Firesprite had, including Firesprite's acquisition of Fabric Games that we'll discuss properly in another episode. Aside from the move to a bigger office, nothing else of note happened to Firesprite in 2022, but they began 2023 releasing their most ambitious game to date, the PSVR 2 launch title Horizon Call of the Mountain. Once again, Firesprite collaborated with another studio, this time with the creators of the Horizon IP in Guerrilla Games. But unlike the Playroom, Firesprite would be the main developer of this first-person climbing/archery game that interestingly used Unreal Engine 4 instead of Guerrilla's in-house Decima engine, which is the reason why Horizon Forbidden West is currently the best looking game of the generation. That's not to say Call of the Mountain doesn't look great though. In fact, the visuals and vistas were pretty much the only reason why it even managed a 79 on Metacritic. It certainly wasn't received as the premier must-have PSVR 2 experience Sony wanted it to be by critics or by players. For me personally, I've only put about an hour into it, despite getting PlayStation VR 2 at launch, as I've had a lot more fun with games like Creed and Pistol Whip. Now that we're up to date on the history of Firesprite, you probably have the same question I had when researching the developer. Considering none of Firesprite's games have even reached an 80 on Metacritic, why does Sony have so much faith in the studio? I honestly couldn't tell you, but Sony clearly sees untapped potential in them because they have at least 3 games in development. The first project is being billed as a AAA horror game that will run on Unreal Engine 5 according to job listings. It was also in development before Firesprite were acquired in 2021, so I imagine it's decently far along now. The second project is a free-to-play multiplayer shooter with a heavy focus on games as a service. This also started development pre-acquisition and was even described as multi-platform, though considering this is almost certainly one of Sony's upcoming 10 live service games, I imagine it's now skipping Xbox, but will come to PC and PS5 simultaneously. At least, that's what should happen if Sony was smart. The third and final project is also the one we know the most about, as it was leaked back in January 2022 that Firesprite had taken over the upcoming Twisted Metal project from Lucid Games. It hasn't been confirmed, but Sony likely took Lucid off the project due to the poor critical and commercial reception of Destruction All-Stars. It's also been reported that senior Starflame Matt Southern, who was the game's director at Lucid, was then poached by Firesprite to continue the job. A big deal, considering he directed multiple MotorStorm games and was even the original pitcher of Drive Club. Finally, it's worth briefly mentioning that prior to acquisition, Firesprite announced a partnership with Star Citizen to develop Theaters of War, a combined arms multiplayer mode where players fight over multiple objectives on the ground and in space. However, it's unknown if Firesprite is still on the project, as Star Citizen is PC only. Okay, so it's clear Sony has a very high opinion of Firesprite, and view them as a huge part of PlayStation Studios' future due to the number of projects in development. But should you be excited about them? Especially when Firesprite haven't even produced an 80 on Metacritic. I'm surprisingly optimistic, as like Compulsion Games under Xbox Game Studios, my gut feeling says Firesprite will really flourish under PlayStation's guidance, and more importantly, their money. I'm most excited about the AAA horror game, as for all its faults, the persistence was immersive due to its Dead Space-inspired aesthetic, and considering it's an Unreal Engine 5 game with Sony's first-party backing, at the very least, it will be a graphically impressive game in a genre that can more easily get away with mid-gameplay, providing the atmosphere is done right. It also shouldn't be understated that Sony ripped the Twisted Metal project from Lucid to give to Firesprite. This move really portrays just how confident Sony are in Firesprite, as this kind of shakeup rarely happens. The Twisted Metal TV show also premieres on July 27th, so depending on how that goes in the wake of HBO's success with The Last of Us, it should be a good barometer of how excited we should be for the game. Finally, I'm least excited for their upcoming live service multiplayer game, as Firesprite has no experience in the genre. It really depends on if they've hired appropriately. Additionally, it's also just one of 10 live service games coming from Sony, and only one of the at least 3 projects Firesprite is developing. This game can therefore fail without significant consequences for Sony's live service plans or Firesprite, as there's other games that can pick up the slack. Hopefully that means the game will at least take some risks. We'll just have to wait for official announcements, which will hopefully occur for at least one of these projects at the May showcase. In the meantime though, let me know what you think about Firesprite's 3 projects in the comments below. Which are you most excited about? Please also like and subscribe if you enjoyed my analysis. I'll see you all in the next video that will most likely be Polyphony Digital, and have a great day.